In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We all know the rhyme. We've all seen the statues. We were taught the story of a brave explorer who discovered America. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the man we've celebrated as a hero was actually a tyrant? A man who kicked off the transatlantic slave trade and unleashed a reign of terror that wiped out entire populations. The history books tend to leave out the darkest chapters, but today, we're going to read them. The story we're usually told is a hero's journey. A visionary, convinced he could reach the east by sailing west, finally gets the backing of the Spanish crown. He sails into the great unknown. His crews are on the brink of mutiny, and his faith is the only thing keeping him going. Then, on October 12th, 1492, a lookout spots land. The hero did it. He's reached the New World. But this is where the heroic tale ends, and a much, much darker one begins. When Columbus arrived in the Bahamas, he met the Taino people. In his own journal, he described them with a chilling lack of humanity. They were well built, with good bodies and handsome features. They would make fine servants. With 50 men, we could subjugate them all and make them do whatever we want. There was no thought of cultural exchange. No wonder at meeting a new branch of the human family. From the very first moment, he didn't see people. He saw a resource to be exploited. That one journal entry is the key that unlocks his entire legacy, a legacy of violence, slavery, and genocide. It would change the world forever. When Columbus returned on his second voyage, he wasn't an explorer anymore. He was a conqueror, a colonial governor, and his mission from Spain was simple. Find gold. Desperate to prove his trip was a good investment, he forced a brutal tribute system on the native people of Hispaniola. Every Taino person, age 14 and up, had to bring him a hawk's bell full of gold dust every 3 months. There was just one fatal flaw in this plan, that much gold simply didn't exist there. The little gold ornaments that Taino wore were collected over generations. They weren't mining the stuff. The tribute was impossible to pay, and Columbus had to have known it. This wasn't a mistake. It was a method of control. The punishment for failing to pay was horrific. The Spanish chopped off the hands of those who came up empty and left them to bleed to death. Others had their noses or ears sliced off. Eyewitnesses, like the Spanish priest Bartolomé de los Casas, who knew Columbus personally, described seeing cruelty on a scale no living being has ever seen or expects to see. People who tried to escape into the mountains were hunted down with dogs trained to kill. The tribute system wasn't really about gold. It was a machine of terror designed to break an entire people. When the gold didn't appear, Columbus switched to a different product. Human beings. Christopher Columbus was the first European slave trader in the Americas, and he pioneered the transatlantic slave trade. This wasn't a side project. It was a business plan he pitched directly to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. In 1495, he rounded up 500 enslaved Taino people and shipped them to Spain. On the brutal journey across the Atlantic, about 200 of them died. But that was just the start. He later wrote, "In the name of the Holy Trinity, we can send from here all the slaves which could be sold." When enslaving the Taino became less profitable because so many of them died, the system he created didn't just stop. It adapted. The Spanish started importing enslaved Africans to the Caribbean to replace the dying native workforce, a practice that began while Columbus was still governor. His methods, his ships, and his economic model laid the foundation for the transatlantic slave trade that would brutalize millions of Africans for centuries to come. Maybe the most stomach-turning part of Columbus's rule was the systematic sexual abuse and trafficking of indigenous women and children. This wasn't just a side effect of the chaos. It was a commercial market that Columbus himself wrote about. In a letter from the year 1500, he noted the high demand for enslaved girls, writing, 100 Castellanos is easily obtained for a woman as for a farm, and it is very general, and there are plenty of dealers who go about looking for girls. Those from 9 to 10 are now in demand. That's not an accusation from a historian. It's a confession, in his own words. He and his men gifted Taino women and girls to their crew, who then beat and raped them. One of his friends, Michel de Cuneo, wrote about how Columbus gave him a beautiful native woman, and when she resisted his assault, he took a piece of rope and whipped her soundly. This was the world Columbus built, a world where human beings were cargo and children were a hot commodity. The result of all this brutality was nothing less than genocide. When Columbus landed on Hispaniola in 1492, the island was home to a thriving civilization. While estimates vary, some historians believe the population was as high as 3 million people. By 1514, just 2 decades after his arrival, the population had collapsed to a reported 32,000. By 1548, fewer than 500 were left. Within a single generation, an entire society was effectively erased from the island. And this wasn't just because of disease, which is a common myth. While diseases like smallpox were devastating, the first major smallpox epidemic did unhit until late 1518, more than 25 years after Columbus got there. The primary killers were violence, torture, enslavement, and a forced labor system that worked people to death. So many Tano took their own lives to escape Spanish rule that mass suicide became a major cause of death. This destruction was even given a legal and moral green light by the doctrine of discovery, a series of decrees from the Pope in the 5th-10th century. One key document from 1493, Te Papilbol Intercaetera, essentially said that any land not inhabited by Christians was free for the taking. This doctrine effectively labeled indigenous peoples as subhuman and their lands as empty, giving a divine blessing to conquest and genocide. So how did this man, a brutal governor, a slaver, and the architect of a genocide, end up as an American hero? The celebration of Columbus is actually a lot more recent than you might think. It started gaining traction in the late 19th century, pushed by Italian-American groups who were facing intense discrimination and wanted a heroic figure to help stake their claim in the American story. It became an annual national holiday in 1937 and a federal holiday in 1968, intended as a symbol of inclusion. But by elevating Columbus, we have erased his victims. We've ignored his own journals and the horrified accounts from his own men. To celebrate Columbus is to celebrate a legacy of torture, slavery, and plunder. It has to ignore the fact that the new world he discovered was already home to millions of people with their own rich cultures and societies. Today, a growing movement is working to replace Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, to honor the people who were here first and whose descendants still live with the legacy of this brutal history. This isn't about erasing history, it's about telling the truth. It is about finally admitting that the heroic myth of Christopher Columbus is a lie that has hidden a horrifying reality for far too long. The history books might have left out the darkest parts, but we don't have to. If you think this history needs to be told, and that the truth deserves to be heard, please like this video, share it, and subscribe for more content that challenges the stories we've all been told. Let's get the real story out there, and let us know in the comments, do you think it is time to replace Columbus Day for good? Thanks for watching.